Hello and welcome to Why Postliberalism Failed. This is season two, episode six, right, Thomas?
Yes, that's right.
My name's James Patterson. With me, as always, is Thomas Howes. In fact, I'm the one who was missing last week. I'm sorry about that. Had a baby and a job starting at the same time. Anyway, I think I said this, but it's August 22nd, 2025. We're recording today on the subject of Slovakia. Slovakia, not one of the most requested subjects for our book, but one that we should cover all the same because it's a unique example of historical post liberalism in that it was run by a Catholic priest during the interwar years. But what did you talk about last week for those who didn't know, Tom?
Oh, I talked about Patrick Deneen. Just gave a run through of what um, eh, why post-liberalism or why liberalism failed, regime change,
Mm-hmm.
some of the ways that he connects with these other contemporary post-liberals, and how he surprised us by connecting his thought back to the sort of reactionary continental European tradition. Which, you know, which for us was a game changer because you have all these other guys citing Carl Schmitt and Donoso Cortez and Marat and I don't, every single one of these guys, Franco. And Deneen he was like the clean one. And then he starts going, saying that Bonald and Donoso Cortez and uh, Billet were proven right in their criticisms of liberal democracy. And even though the Second Vatican Council was reading the signs of the times to affirm it, we should rethink that now. That those were the things that Deneen said to Bishop Barron last year. And we took so much heat for calling him out on it, but whatever.
It was
We're
a
gonna,
genuinely shocking moment. You're right; he had been the one who had done his best to kind of keep his hands clean. But the mask slips, and next thing you know, the effort to reimagine the argument from the kind of conspiracy theory of the 19th and early 20th century to a structural theory where liberalism is structured as like a blind historical force in the way that the left often talks about structural racism.
yeah,
And it turns out behind that, there was all this other stuff anyway. And
yeah,
so it's like there's really just two tracks. You can either be on the sort of normal track where you think liberalism is bad and you don't really think beyond that, and
yeah,
then there's the esoteric track in which you're citing Bonald, and
yeah.
telling
It's like,
a bishop to take his advice from a cardinal that was decardinalated by the
yeah,
Pope. I don't know, man. We did
yeah.
this
It was completely
last year,
predict.
and what's
Yeah,
that?
it was completely predictable. I mean, the, we all knew, because he ends why liberalism failed, with this sort of like, oh, we just got to go back to local democracy and build from there. Well, liberalism destroys itself, and then something better will emerge organically. And he doesn't last like very long at all with that. And you know that his alternative is going to start looking like every other reactionary, anti-liberal alternative, right-wing alternative of the past. And that's what it ended up being with regime change. The Machiavellian means to Aristotelian ends. He rejects separation of powers, checks and balances. Basically, he wants to use the momentum of populism to establish a new elite. In a so
It's a
what
template for literally every other post-liberal order
yeah,
attempting to achieve power that we have as historical samples in the book. Um, the only difference, again, like we've said a few times, is that there's not the use of an army to establish a coup.
yeah, that's right.
And that's because, it doesn't work that way in the
Yeah,
United States. The regimes that we've, go through historically, they were in such bad shape that the only functioning institutions left in most cases were the army.
yeah.
So, anyway,
But at the same
uh,
time, there's at the same time, James, they're they've actually taken their methods less from the uh reactionary right of the early 20th century and borrowed more from the left.
Yeah,
They're more
that's
like the
true.
1960s left, I would say, of training. There's a blog post from Gladden Papin at his what's it called, Post-Liberal Order,
Hmm.
where he talks about how for the last 4 years we've been training loyalists that the Trump administration can place into positions of power. And there's a guy named on Twitter named, what's his name, Jason Hart. He's been keeping track of these loyalists from the beginning. They had these blogs called Post Liberal Order or the American Post Liberal and all these other things. And what Jason Hart kept pointing out was these were some seedy characters, like these were kids involved in white nationalism, Nick Fuentes type people, whatever. And these were the ones that were, involved in leadership of these post-liberal groups. And now they're getting positions of in government because they're seen as loyalists, right? So there is a little bit of an integration from within that they're cooperating with other elements of the new right, such as the Curtis Yarvins and the Tech Authority, all of them, towards with Christopher Rufo, and they are very much aware consciously of this idea of capturing institutions the way 1960s leftists did.
It's a funny thing where um, a lot of people are surprised or unaware of what's going on, and all you have to do is just go read it. They're
Yeah,
narrating live
yeah,
what they're doing.
yeah,
And all, like, I explain this to people and they're amazed, and I'm like, it's it took me like 5 minutes to find this. Like, it's not,
yeah,
they want you to read this.
yeah. Well, it's been interesting for us because we've been spending, all this time on this for years, and people kind of ignore it. But now it's becoming mainstream. You're hearing a lot of mainstream people talking about the problem of the post-liberal right. So our book's coming out at the right time, at least, it's
Yeah.
it's hot.
And rather than talk about, what was it, this ISI podcast, maybe we'll talk about it, but there was this podcast with Curtis Yarvin, Patrick Deneen, Christopher Rufo, obviously, Johnny Bertka, who's president of ISI. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who wants to abolish the 14th Amendment that they also had on there.
Oh gosh, that'd be terrible.
No, I
Uh,
forgot his name, but he
uh,
wrote he wrote a book to that effect that was very popular. Um, anyway, we may write something about that. Speak about that at a later time. But we decided to go with what the kids are after, and that is, of course,
yeah.
talking about Father Josef Tiso,
Oh,
right?
Father Josef
Who
Tiso.
who doesn't want to talk about
For
Slovakia, right?
Slovakia. That's right. That's that one that's east of Czech Republic, right? It used to be
That's
part of
right.
Czechoslovakia. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
Slovakia. So,
so we have these chapters on the historical cases of these interwar post-liberal regimes, and we kind of divide them into a few different categories. One chapter is about post-liberal or integralist parties that attempt and fail to secure political power in some kind of coalition of right-wing parties, and those are like Brazil and Argentina, um, and Portugal. And then we have chapter in which we talk about their success. And in all of the successful ones, they are a kind of clerical fascist. And we explain that there's clerical fascism is the attempt to appropriate and reinterpret fascism away from the kind of secular national socialism of Mussolini and instead incorporate a lot of traditional Catholic elements. Um, and not that other integralist parties in the other chapter aren't doing this; they just never get there.
yeah.
And so that's what clerical fascism means. There's two kinds of clerical fascism. There's the collusive, in which the church or elements of the Catholic laity essentially work hand in glove with a fascist party, and that's more of like what happens in Austria. And then there's the conflationary, and that's when the things become the same. where Catholic action, or it's like politicized version, and a fascist party essentially consolidate. And that's what Franco does, right? He essentially takes the Carlists and the Phalange and slams them together in an extremely long party name that I can't remember, but and then appoints himself the head of it. And in the case of Slovakia, we're going to be looking at something that's the latter. It's going to be a conflationary clerical fascism. These are the worst. Like Croatia is the same way, and really the only uh, nation worse than Slovakia in this case is Croatia. Slovakia is
Hmm.
like the silver medalist,
Yeah, for
and
evil.
for evil, yeah,
Yeah,
like for evil.
yeah.
A little prehistory on Slovakia is
Would you say
that.
that
Oh, go
that
ahead.
would you say that T what's his name, Tiso, right?
Tiso,
Joseph
yeah.
Tiso. Would you say that he makes Francisco Franco look like Mitt Romney?
No, 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 because look, Franco objectively killed more people. All
Oh,
right,
that's true. That's true.
he just did, and I don't mean
But
like
less
in a
cruel about it though,
war.
right?
What's that?
A little less cruel about it though, right? With his killing.
Uh,
Maybe, I don't know. I mean,
no.
rounding up Freemasons for being Freemasons or suspected of being Freemasons and just shooting them is kind of cruel already, I guess.
Yeah, using a thin veneer of science in order to kidnap and place children and then replace them. And I mean, like, so Franco is on the numbers worse,
Uh-huh.
but he has more time.
Yes.
So we're talking about like deaths per day.
Okay.
Tiso was the silver medalist because
Well,
he's
you know
not in
what?
charge for that long.
One of Mussolini's guys actually said about Franco was that his list of political enemies that he wants to persecute is so long, and he's just never going to get through it because he likes to take a siesta.
The
So there
Italians
was,
coming for the Spanish on laziness. That
yeah,
is, maybe he must have been from northern Italy.
yeah, I guess.
Anyway, but now that you got me thinking about Franco, maybe I should say that Tiso was the bronze medalist. It's hard to say, but if you're going by deaths per day, I think we're looking at Slovakia. But
Yeah,
a little prehistory on Slovakia is that it had a name before that, which is Bohemia. And this was a large Central European kingdom that by the 15th century had gone through a bunch of problems. Its king had died, and there was also the Ultraquist heresy, which is led by a man named Jan Hus. Jan Hus is kind of one of these pre-reformational characters
yeah,
where he like on the one hand he's not pre-reformation in that he demands like the Eucharist, but the Eucharist that he
yeah,
wants is the body and blood. So he believes in like transubstantiation and real presence, but he also establishes that papal authority is beneath that of Scripture, and so this way of thinking is also
yeah.
very much part of this way of this Ultraquist heresy. So there's a lot of these elements that are still out there, and by no means is Jan Hus inventing all of this out of whole cloth. There were lots of sort of medieval heresies that made arguments like this. I mean, I think maybe the Waldensians, but anyway, I may be wrong about that, but there's a lot to cover, so I should probably not
Well,
speculate.
I just want to, since you mentioned Jan Hus, I won't say
Yeah.
his name because the guy's been piled on a lot lately. But one of the famous post-liberals once said on Twitter that if we would have done, because Jan Hus was murdered
This is
for.
Father Edmund Waldstein who said
No,
this.
no, no. Okay, okay. I was
Oh,
trying to go
wait.
easy on him. I was trying to go
Oh,
easy on him.
really? I guess he's
Uh,
going through a lot right now.
he's going through a lot right now, but he's well. He said that because Jan Hus was murdered for heresy. He said if we would have done to Martin Luther what we did to Jan Hus, there wouldn't have been a Reformation.
Which is maybe
Insane.
true. I don't know. Like
I don't think so.
anyway,
I think a lot was
um
going on sociologically. One more murder wasn't going to stop the
yeah,
flow.
yeah. Anyway, so the Hussites become a problem because for um almost what is it? What I have here, 15 years. The Hussites become a kind of established church in Bohemia, and they resist efforts to reincorporate into the Catholic Church. Instead, they want the church to sort of bend to them. So you have the death of Sigismund. I'm sorry if I'm looking over here. Who was king of Hungary? He was the person who was
I
supposed
remember
to
that guy.
secure it, the land as his inheritance, and then it went to Albert of Austria and Ladislas, and then eventually King George of Podebrady. And I'm sorry if I'm not saying that right. Sat there on the throne with no legitimate Catholic claimant able to secure it from him. 1466, the Pope excommunicates him, and then there's this big war, and eventually Matthias Corvinus, the namesake of Orban's higher education institution in Hungary, and Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III are able to bring it to the sword. King George had died already, and Matthias Corvinus assumes the throne in 1478, I believe. So after this, there's a lot of Ottomans showing up with ideas about turning Western Europe or Central Europe into an Ottoman vassal. And so the Austrians become very involved in all of this. And so when the instead of Bohemia, but eventually, like what happens is that Bohemia falls into the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Slovakia, what we now know as the Czech Republic. These all sort of fall under the Habsburg control. And when it does, the Reformation has really taken hold there. And so they engage in something called the Defenestration of Prague in 1618 and impose Catholicism by the sword. And at that
Always
point,
a bad idea.
and it doesn't really take. If you go check out how Slovakia is doing in terms of its religious attendance. But anyway, the Slovakians live under United Habsburg rule even after the Napoleonic Wars. It's really the 1848 split between Hungary and Austria, in which the Habsburgs have to make major concessions to the Hungarians. That Slovakia's status changes. So that's a long time. That's a few centuries. And Hungary gets Slovakia as a source of its control during this period. Um, and the process in Slovakia that begins soon after is called Magyarization. And Magyar is
The
a
word for
term used.
Hungary.
What's that?
That's the Hungarian word for Hungary.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that is the process of making Slovakia more Hungarian and less sort of ethnically distinct.
Well, so
Uh,
like what is that what the post liberals are doing now? Magyarization of like the GOP? Yeah.
Somebody said to us about the show that you're the good cop and I'm the bad cop.
Yeah, okay.
But that should have been my line.
Oh, I'm
Uh,
sorry. I'm sorry.
no, 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 no. That's true. Um, that is true. In fact, one of the things that makes it particularly funny is that Slovaks knew that cooperation with Magyarization was actually the path to influence. It would never be quite the same as being actually Hungarian and being a part of the Hungarian sort of royal authority, but at least you could work at a middle level as a Slovakian who, assumes a Hungarian pronunciation of their name and uses Hungarian names for different places. And one of the people who actually does this is Josef Tiso. He Magyarizes himself, and despite being from Slovakia and being Slovakian
Interesting.
ethnically, and much of this continues apace through the end of the 19th century. And of course, there's a First World War, but Slovakia's, um, remains under the original status that it had in the Austro-Hungarian Empire until its dissolution at the end of the war. And at that point, you have the creation of an odd country called Czechoslovakia, which takes two similar but not the same ethnic groups and slams them together in like this little like strip of land. And they're supposed to be a kind of new state that's capable of self-government. even though as a power, it's a relatively minor one, and it's sitting between what used to be a major power, and not too far away from another major power in the Soviet Union. Um, but the one that really decides to go grab it is Germany, right? And under the Third Reich, you have the annexation of the eastern part of Slovakia. What year? I don't have the 39, in which March 15th, 1939, Hitler takes it. But the part that he sees is primarily the Czech part, not the Slovakian part.
Yeah.
And it is at this point
And that's
when
the Sudetenland? Is that,
yeah.
or is that, do they go further
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, that's right.
okay.
And I'm getting mixed, right? I've
Oh
got
no,
all
it's
this stuff I
okay.
have to talk about. So thank you for that.
Yeah, because I think that was the one that preceded the whole discussion with Chamberlain and Hitler, or the deal
Right.
they cut. Yeah,
And they
okay.
use the presence of German nationals in the area as a basis for this, right? It's
Yeah.
um so I like all the reviewing I did for this episode I did on Tiso and not on
Oh
um
no, it's okay.
yeah,
I'm just trying to
so
get I'm trying to like line up with this in myself, trying to understand it. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
so what was left of like there's of Czechoslovakia is mostly Slovakia. And as it happens, the person who was the most predominant figure left was a Catholic priest named Josef Tiso, who
Was
I'd
he a
already
sec was
mentioned.
he like a secular priest, like a parish priest, or was he a
Mm-hmm.
religious?
Yeah,
Okay.
he was not from a religious order. Um, Now he grows up in the pre First World War Hungarian Magyarization of Slovakia. That's his context, right? He doesn't grow up during the First World War, and so his primary formation as a Catholic priest, um, begins in like 1900. He becomes a priest in 1910, receives a PhD from the University of Vienna in 1911, and is very much part of the same kind of political ideas of this period. He's very taken up with Catholic social teaching that had developed from Leo the 13th. He had, taken to heart the idea of the integration of Catholic social teaching into modern industrial societies, a kind of ralliement style, but in Slovakia rather than in France. Unfortunately, something that doesn't, um, sorry, one thing that doesn't quite work out for us is that a major part of instruction from this period was um, the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy theory. This is a major
Yeah.
feature of the people who teach there. He's at a little seminary in Slovakia, especially in Nitra or Nitra. I'm not sure. I've only ever read that. I've not said that out loud. Where he's originally from, and so that's where he's living for much of this after he's finished with his schooling and formation and receiving holy orders. And the thing about this city at the time is that Nitra had a lot of Jews. It was a very Jewish city, and they owned a lot of the businesses and in the town, and a lot of Slovakians felt a lot of just contempt for them because they were seen as nickel and diming ordinary Slovakians during a period, of the First World War and then afterwards, when Slovakia was economically distressed, right? And so, really, the problem was that the Slovakians were just objectively poorer than they used to be because of a war. But the scapegoat they used were just like you would expect were the Jews, and the prevailing sort of Judeo-Masonic conspiracy theory that had emerged in the church, or at least among some of those people teaching in church institutions, had made that very easy transition for them. Um, the problem for Tiso was that he adhered to this political Catholicism or Catholic integralism, as at a time when a lot of people in Czechoslovakia did not want to do that. That was regarded as Austrian, just like the Croatians, right? the major populist parties were pretty secular. They weren't like anti-Christian or anti-Catholic, but they regarded this kind of adoption of public Catholicism as something the Austrians imposed and always suited the throne and altar. So there's this kind of like lower intensity Jacobinism that's always in there. So there's in 1883, for example, before Tiso is really a big part of this, there had already been a lot of these kinds of attacks on the population there, but it was Tiso who was going to bring them in and bring them back. By 1918, he starts a newspaper just called Nitra, and he has like slogans that he uses in the articles, like "Don't be a traitor to your kin and blood." Not to put too fine a point on it, right?
Yeah.
And each to their own was another one. I'm getting all of this from a really startling book called Priest, Politician, and Collaborator, Josef Tiso and the Making of Fascist Slovakia. It's by James Mace Ward. He described him as the neo-Thomist principle of justice, having a neo-Thomist principle of justice that served as a mantra for ethnic nationalism. And over the course of 1918 and 1919, the anti-Semitism goes from slogans that sort of have an ambivalent meaning or ambiguous meaning to here's one: brothers, Christians, why beat around the bush? We are slaves of Jews. They order, we keep quiet. And then in another article, no Jew shall have a pub or tobacco shop, but that he wants this prohibition not to be understood as out of hatred of Jews. Right. So that was, yeah, we're just taking it from you, but don't think that we hate you. We just don't want you to have it. And so that's like the way he tries to kind of like edge his way to just being an out and out anti-Semite. Now, the reason why he does the anti-Semitism is not because he's crazy. It's because if he's if he's adopted an ideology that is less popular after Magyarization, he needs to find a way to remain relevant politically. And so his way of doing this was to latch his sort of like clerical sort of vision of politics to something more modern. And what could be more modern than hatred of the Jews and their liberal politics and their embrace of social democracy?
So this is what okay, so you have this is what your like highbrow post liberals today do with like people's resentment about immigration. They really jump in on the immigration thing, like what you have Orban is famous for being, whatever. And obviously Europe has they let their immigration get out of control. That's fine. That's fine to say that, but there's a difference between saying that immigration is getting out of control and actually like scapegoating immigrants as like this sort of like these are the cause of all of our problems and that you've seen. Um, it definitely seems to me that at least through some of their vocal leaders that this sort of thing has that's kind of what's going on there, that this is our relevance, right? We can jump in through people's resentment about this stuff to push these other things that we have on our agenda, right? Does that sound right?
That is exactly right.
Yeah.
So there is populist unhappiness and a great deal of political unsettlement. This is a brand new country, right? And everyone is contesting for a place of a political authority. And if you're on the back foot, the way to get back onto the front foot is by finding a common hatred that can unify disparate groups as they try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Now when he's doing this, he's a member of a party called the Christian Socials, and you may have heard this name before if you've watched us or listened to us before. That was the name of the party in Austria. So it does not help his case, right, that he literally belongs to the old Austrian party,
Okay.
the Austro-Hungarian party. And this had been a problem for him, a nagging problem for him. Everyone knew he had been a person who had Magyarized his name. He goes back to the Slovakian pronunciation, but you can't erase the history of what he had been doing. And so there was obviously opportunism here, and a lot of people knew this, right? That he was very ambitious and maybe not terribly honest in his self presentation. But what allows for a kind of reset for him is the formation of a party I do not know how to pronounce the name of, but because there's like accents over an L, and I've not encountered that before. It's a Slovakian name. I'll just say Ludox. It's probably not it. Um, but this was essentially an integralist party in the way that in the way that it organized, and was under the leadership of a man named Hlinka, who was a priest that as well that had started it. So this was a party that was meant to be a third way between social democracy of the Slovakian left and the the old sort of imperial or monarchist sort of approach that you had from the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Helenka was very much embracing the same kinds of ideas of a kind of right-wing interpretation of Catholic social teaching from Leo the 13th and Pius the 11th, but attached to it very much was Slovakia nationalism. Now, this is a problem in the 1920s because Slovakia is not an independent country, right? It is part of Czechoslovakia. And so the Hlinken or the Ludox party is actually kind of an anti-patriotic party, right? It is a party that wants to dissolve the union between the Czechs and the Slovaks, as well as the other sort of German and Hungarian and populations, and form their own sort of ethnically consolidated organization. And so Nitra becomes a newspaper designed to promote this point of view. And the target becomes the Democrats who are disproportionately Jewish. And he says that they are a party that is revolutionary, godless, and led by genuine, unadulterated, hook-nosed Jews. And when you had there was like when the government formed in Czechoslovakia, there was a bunch of people that had fled the city out of concern about what the city would do, and some of them were Jews who were had a right to be worried, and so when they returned, Tiso says of them that he welcomes them home. It welcomes home nitrous millionaires. And so this is the kind of quality writing you're getting from a member of the Catholic clergy in
What did his
Slovakia.
bishop think about him being so involved in politics like this?
That is exactly where we're headed next. So that we have I have in the chapter a few other examples that James Mace Ward provides, but the thing about all of this is, like I said, he's trying to sort of reimagine himself. I have it here as from zealous Hungarian soldier of God to guardian of the Slovak nation. What happens is that he has an opportunity to pivot away from politics, because really all he's doing during this period is working out on the publicity side of this party. He's not he's an important figure, but he's not the leader. That's Hlinka. Father Hlinka is the one who runs the party. And so what happens is that his bishop, Karol Kmetko, likes him, thinks he's smart. They're both members of this party of Ludox. And so what's crazy is that Kmetko brings him in to the episcopal office, and makes him a Monsignor.
Wow.
Yeah, and is working as his assistant. And what happens is that Pius the 11th becomes Pope, and communicates to all the bishops that he wants for there to be a significantly reduced direct political participation of the clergy, and instead for there to be the formation of Catholic action, which we've
Yeah.
talked about many times on the show before. This is meant to be kind of like a civil society approach to integrate people into politics as Catholics, but not led by clergy into politics, right? Kmetko hears this, obeys the Pope. Tiso doesn't. want to do that. Tiso stays very much the editor of Nitra and continues his politicking in public. And as a result of this, Kmetko more or less fires him from and wants nothing to do with him because not only is Tiso like an unpleasant person, right? He doesn't want to be tied to Tiso's activity in case the Pope comes down on Tiso like a ton of bricks. Like he did what he could, right? Demoted him effectively, and the way that he does that is interesting. Is that when this is what Ward says: when you're a Monsignor, that is a title you hold until a Pope passes.
Yeah.
Um, and everyone who's made Monsignor is just simply renewed as a matter of course. And Kmetko intervenes directly to deny this. So after the word goes out from Pius the 11th and Tiso doesn't comply, Kmetko insists that this not be renewed.
Yeah.
And then so one day, like Tiso discovers that he's not Monsignor Tiso anymore. And this will come up again later because it's a funny thing that happens later. And so by 1921, Tiso had gone from this had all started in 1918 when he was becoming more of a person of clerical influence. In the course of 3 years, he'd blown it all up by just refusing to obey the bishop.
Okay.
So Blue Docs as a party follows a very similar paradigm as a lot of the other parties we've looked at, as it begins to form a kind of integralist or clerical fascist kind of approach, imitating very closely Mussolini. Once Mussolini comes to the fore as a major figure for imitation. For example, Hlinka forms a black shirt union, like the fascist party in Italy. They're called the Rotobrana. And so one of the ways that Ludox sort of expands its influence is in the form of paramilitary policing of neighborhoods and intimidation tactics of social democratic hearts of Nitra, like the Jewish neighborhoods. Um, they're eventually forced underground, the Rotobrana, but by 1925 they're brought back, and the person who brings them back is a man named Voljech Tuka. Tuka is going to be the chief rival for Tiso as the two of them fight over influence when Father Hlinka dies. Um, so the thing about the politics of Czechoslovakia is that it's a bit of a mess, as you would expect. New country, lots of different ethnic populations. And so, in forming a government, the right-wing parties have to kind of figure out who they want in and out because in an election in 1926, the left loses, the right wins, and so among the parties that are included into the coalition are Ludox, and the person who's placed in a ministerial role was Tiso. So Tiso becomes the Minister of Health and Physical Education, right? Not of war, not of state.
I've seen a picture of this Tiso guy. I don't know if he should have been the head of the health and physical education.
Hey, no, does not the picture of health, okay? But you know, learn from his mistakes. But no, that's true. The thing about this job is that it is not a terribly important job, but it does have a lot of sources for revenue, and it has a lot of publicity associated with it. So what Tiso would do is he would go to hospitals. He would go to state-run hospitals and sort of take pictures. And he would always go in his clericals. He was always dressed as an ordained priest. And yeah, another thing is that apparently they had lucrative spas, according to Ward. I've never heard of Slovakian spas. I'm going to take their word for it. But another important thing that he was at least nominally in charge of were all the sports teams. So all of the things that would go on eventually in like the Olympics, for example, would fall under his purview. And when he was in these clericals, he always made sure that he explained that even though he was a priest, he was doing this in service to the nation, and that wouldn't just include Catholics, but also Lutherans, or that are there. Um, but whenever he was challenged for the conduct of the political coalition, and he would always resort to his Catholicism. He would say, "We are Catholics, and thus our highest law is justice for everyone." And so he was always just trying to kind of play between his sort of public representation of an engaged Catholic priest in politics, not, in a way that the Pope was not happy with, which we'll get to. Um, so there is a kind during this period a minor step in the right direction with the Vatican. They reached something called a modus vivendi, which is kind of like a temporary concordat with the promise of returning to it. But as things were looking good for Tiso politically in this role he has as a secondary but still important minister, this Tuca guy who had formerly run the paramilitary organization, the Rotobrana, and then brought it back after it was forced underground. He is contesting Tiso's position as the kind of heir apparent to Father Hlinka. And he keeps trying to undermine the growing base of support that Tiso has, which of course Tuca has to do, because being the most publicly prominent member of this party means that Tiso's only getting more political capital by the day, provided he doesn't make any major mistakes. But what's crazy is that the way that Tuca ultimately succeeds in undermining Tiso is by committing a crime. So Tuca screws up. All right, what he does is he insists that the Ludox party wants to remove the Slovakian portion of Czechoslovakia and was colluding with Hungary to accomplish this. And so he's found guilty of high treason, and the Hlinka party, the Ludox party, is kicked out of the coalition, and Tiso's fired. So the Tuca is like going to bring Tiso down with him. Essentially, is what happens. See, that wasn't like the idea. No one was supposed to know about Tuca's like weird kind of nationalist coup here, but that is what happens.
And what year was that?
It was in 1929. So
1929.
Tiso was in office for a little under 3 years as this
Okay,
minister.
as a Minister of Health and Physical Education.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, what happens to Tiso and Ludox is they spin their wheels for 10 years.
Okay.
Czechoslovakia has like different elections. Ludox are kind of around, but they're not a major party. They're kind of a second tier party. And but their persistence is very important because by 1938, Hlinka dies and Tiso does take over.
Okay.
And once Tiso takes over, all of the rumblings from the Third Reich is that they're going to demand the annexation of Sudetenland. If I'd only scrolled down, I would have seen all the details for this. That I was like, when I was flailing earlier on the historical details of the
Oh, no, it's all
annexation of
good.
Sudetenland. So you have the Munich Agreement in 38. Hlinka died in the summer of 38. By October, they're doing the Munich Agreement to partition Czechoslovakia. And Germany gets a lot of the western half. Hungary gets the southern pieces that they wanted and originally collaborating with Tuca to secure. And then Poland gets a tiny bit to the north. And what's left is mostly Slovakia.
Yeah.
And the most amenable party in Slovakia to what Hitler wanted was Ludox.
Wow.
Right? They had been a clerical fascist party. They had Tuca was still around, even though he'd been found guilty of high treason. Tuca was more of an Orthodox Nazi.
Yeah.
And so internal to this party, it's funny, like there's only one person worse than Tiso, and that is Tuca.
Yeah.
But Tuka does not have the relationship with Hitler that Tiso does.
Oh, they were buddies.
Tiso and was definitely when Hitler said jump, Tiso was definitely a how high kind of guy. Um, and so Tizo's coalition wins in a new election after the partitions go through. And when the kind of like parliament in exile for Czechoslovakia attempts to essentially annul all of this, the way that Tiso is able to secure the guarantee for the election was that he meets with Hitler in Berlin. And Hitler agrees at the end of the year to essentially guarantee the new independent Slovakian state, provided that they would become essentially a client for Germany.
Okay.
And in order to kind of like make it possible for Slovakia to govern themselves, they use their old paramilitary Rotobrana as the new police and military force. And the person who was put in charge of that was a man named Alexander Mock, who was just a straight up Nazi collaborator in Slovakia, a person whose loyalties were actually ultimately to the Third Reich and not to the Slovakian people. So
So the Tiso at this point is the president of this new Slovakian Republic.
yeah,
That's collaborate. It's a client state of the Nazis, and then the Tuka guy is the prime minister, right?
I didn't put in what Tuka was doing here.
I think he's
I could.
involved as.
What's that?
I think he is. I think I just looked it up. I think he
Yeah,
is the prime minister. So those two are like
and they
it.
they do not like each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should put in the Tuka in the chapter that he became prime minister for right about that. So these are the three most important people in order: Tiso, Tuka, and Mock. And in terms of like the overall relevance of Slovakia to the broader Nazi agenda, they're not that big of a deal, right? They're just a necessary resolution to a loose end that came up from Munich. But for our purposes, it's important to look because this is the case of a clerical fascist or a Catholic integralist party having more or less politically alienated a lot of people outside of Slovakia, suddenly getting control. And what does it do? Right? It has a lot of the same problems as Austria, and that there are people who are more on the integralist side and more on the Nazi side or the fascist side. Austria was they weren't Nazi, they were fascist. And so that's kind of the breakdown in the party is that Tiso is more of like the clerical fascism, and Tuka is more of the Nazi, and Mock
Okay.
is more of the Nazi sort of thing. And Tiso starts off not doing great. All right, like Tiso falls into this problem of what's called the Vienna Award, in which some more territories given this land that's given to Hungary. They try to stop it and they lose. It's called the Vienna Award because the decision to reach this is in Vienna. And I don't know. I don't think Tiso really got to make any kind of interventions to prevent it. He was so caught off guard, and he had to ensure that he would not screw up again. Right, that was it, the Vienna Award. It was kind of out of his hands in some ways. Right, there are two larger powers that are doing this, and so he can't really criticize the people that, like in Germany, that saw to this because they're his guarantors. So he has to essentially sort of admit that it was fine that they did this. But the next thing he has to deal with is the Jewish question, because Slovakia is a collaborator in 38. All right,
Yeah.
early, and the Jewish question is something that obviously you would think Tiso already has an answer to, right? He was spending so much of his political career starting in 1918. So at this point, 20 years on and off, like just railing against Slovakian Jews. And he was actually not the most extreme. This is what's amazing is that the Tuka wanted to kill all of them. All right. And Tiso had some reservations. There were people that had been Jews in terms of their religious profession who had converted to Catholicism. and he thought they should not be included. And this points to something you keep mentioning, which is that there's two forms of anti-Semitism that get confused,
Yeah.
right? Tiso's is that clerical fascist or that integralist one, in which it's about the sacramental state of the person. And the Jewish question, as the Nazis framed it and imposed on Slovakia with the Nuremberg laws, was the biological sort of idea that
Yeah.
the Jews were like a defective biological thing. And so they
Yeah.
couldn't be allowed to procreate.
Yeah.
And so the incompatibility of these visions actually becomes a problem for Tiso, because where they disagree is like, do you get rid of ethnically Jewish Catholic converts? Tiso says no, Tuka says yes, and Hitler says yes. And so in 41, what Tiso has done by then is that he's more or less um, seized all Jewish property and has handed it over to the Slovaks. And then by 41, he's a demand. The demand from Hitler is to impose the Nuremberg laws, which would include things like the Star of David on the arm, and the establishment of concentration camps. Now, Tiso had already imposed limits on Jewish movement, so they were in ghettos. They could only live in certain places. And now you were supposed to dissolve the ghettos and relocate the Jews to concentration camps. So Tiso wanted to essentially go through a bureaucratic process of filtering out converts from still practicing Jews. And the process would begin with the Orthodox, right? Like he would start sending to the concentration camps the Orthodox, because they were the ones that most obviously had not converted and were, in his view, like the least assimilable, which had always been the problem for the integralists, right? That Jews won't assimilate as a people in the same way. At this point, he, you know, this they pass a Jewish code in 41 that's meant to kind of be the halfway here, and now we have a Catholic priest and head of state pass Jewish laws. They're not quite the Nuremberg Code yet, but they're close. And Pope Pius XI loses his mind. All right, he has not been happy about this the whole time. And it says that he's going to strip Tiso of his Monsignor status.
Wow.
And he can't, because it already happened. And that's what a mess the Vatican was. They didn't know. They didn't know that it had never been renewed. So there were lots of people still calling him Monsignor. And you know, it wasn't like Tiso was going to correct them, but he hadn't been a Monsignor at this point for like 10 years. and so what does Pius XI do instead? Nothing, because there's nothing he can do. I mean, I think there was something he could have done, but in his view, there was nothing he could do. And so what Tiso does instead is he tries to defend himself. He says, "This is again a translation that I quote from Ward." When he's defending the Ludok's sort of Catholic reinterpretation of Nazism, he says, he says, by National Socialism, Tiso mainly meant the order and a radical equality of duties for every member of the nation, which would then solve the social question as one big happy family. It's a very silly attempt to kind of mollify the Vatican, especially since by this point, since 1937, the church had made its position on Nazism quite obvious with Mitt Brennender Sorge. But really, because Pius XI didn't have any chips to play, Tiso was allowed to essentially persevere and continue to hold his position as a kind of like halfway position between the older, more Catholic integralist anti-Semitism and the Nazi anti-Semitism. But what happens is that eventually Tiso has to make a choice. And what he does instead is he attempts to bring the two together. So he's going to do a kind of Nuremberg style treatment of Jews, but for the on the basis of his own sort of Catholic vision. So we end up with the worst of both worlds here, where he's going to try to make a Catholic case for the dissolution of the Jews entirely, or a kind of Judenrein for Slovakia. And this all begins pretty soon after the deal with Pius the 11th. By October of 1941, Tiso meets with Heinrich Himmler and Alexander Mock. Tiso insists that this did not happen, but evidence came to the surface that he had been at this. And Himmler said that it was now time for Slovakia to begin exporting Jews for the final solution. And October 1941, I mean, we're looking at like peak Nazi power, right? This is before the Americans even get involved. And so there's really like no daylight allowed for Tiso anymore. And so what he does is he begins the process of visiting parts of the sort of extended Nazi sort of holdings with Nazi agents or officers in public settings. So the one trip he makes outside includes going to Ukraine. And what Tiso does is he goes to an Orthodox cathedral and prays in it. And then hours after he leaves, the Nazis blow it up. And when he speaks at Ukraine, he's given a chance to speak. What he says is that he's very impressed with the way the Nazis are exterminating the Jews there. And this is like the first public demonstration that he has gone from this kind of like halfway position to a full-on position. So this is when he really began to radicalize. And what he does is he likes to talk about how the Jewish influence on Slovakia would have made an attempt to create what he ironically calls a Bolshevik paradise, right? One that's not a paradise at all, and that it was Jewish leadership that had turned the Soviet Union into what it was. And he goes to an audience of Catholic students at a Catholic school, and he says this to them. This is a quotation again from Ward. We need to understand our age and to love it. In other words, we need to know what time it is. Not only for the way that that it has gone astray, but indeed in these very ways, there is no question that that we find ourselves at the beginning of a painful beginning of a new world era, and therefore we cannot judge it according to the past, right? So we can't have this kind of appeal to a conservative tradition. I mean, what has that conservatism conserved? We must have our eyes fixed on the newborn. The tragic fate of the church is that yesterday's Christians judge today according to yesterday's standards, right? Therefore, the church has to abandon the present, which has already become the past. And it's strange that people today do not notice God's providence directs the spirit of the church. It's useless to worry because everything is guided by God's will. So this was his way of defending Slovakian Judenreich, right? Is that people who are concerned about issues of personhood, of justice, these are people that are using outdated ideas that have failed, right? And so the new sort of like, way, the new vision would be one in which the church understands the necessity and virtue of the extermination of the Jews.
Holy cow.
On March 25th, 1942, he begins Judenrein. Right? So he between 50 to 95,000 Slovakian Jews were deported. Ward is on the lower end with 58,000, and that's like the ones that I think we can sort of verify. But a lot are missing. So they may have vanished, they may have killed, they may have gone under assumed name. So there's a lot of Jews who are just missing in all of this. And by summer of 1942, people are noticing, and they're kind of freaked out, to be honest, right? It kind of freaks people out. Not everybody. Like some people are very excited about this.
Yeah.
And so he stands to defend his position in a Western Slovakian city of Holic. I have no idea if I'm saying this correctly, but he says people ask if what we do is Christian. Here, meaning the dissolution of Jewish communities and their shipped to concentration camps for the purposes of extermination. Is it human? Isn't it robbery? But I ask, is it Christian if the Slovak nation wants to rid itself of its eternal enemy, the Jew? Is it Christian? Love of self is a command of God, and this love of self commands me to remove everything that damages me or threatens my life. I don't think I need to convince anyone that the Jewish element threatens the lives of Slovaks. We determined that the Jews, who made up only 5% of the population, had 38% of the national income. It would have looked even worse if we hadn't pulled ourselves together in time, if we hadn't purged them from us. And we did so according to the divine command: Slovak, cast off your parasite.
Oh my gosh. It reminds me a little bit of Heinrich Himmler. There's a they're called the Posen speeches, 1943 at the town hall of Posen, in Poland. And even Himmler was like stretching everything he could for some sort of justification about, this isn't this, if people today in their current morality don't understand this, but they will thank us later because we did what was had to be done. We are talking about the Holocaust, and it kind of that sort of language sort of it just sort of reminds me of that sort of obvious like rationalization for this evil thing. And knowing that it even to themselves it seems very evil.
Yeah, there. It's like, who are you trying to convince? The Poles or you?
Yeah, that's what it
And
sounds like.
and yeah, so Hitler is very impressed by this speech and says publicly, it is interesting how this little Catholic priest Tiso is sending us the Jews. And he makes this public statement. Ward seems to believe that this was intentional. At the time when the Vatican had sent two high-ranking envoys to Slovakia to kind of meet with Tiso and like tell him to stop, I think. And It did, of course, and I'm sorry, and Tiso did, of course, make an attempt to defend what he was doing when Pope Pius the 12th
Yeah.
ascends the throne. And so, how is it that Slovakia attempted to justify all of this? Well, Tiso too. Here's something that may surprise you. The first thing they did is they adopted a principle of Führerprinzip. Are you
Yeah.
surprised?
No,
Right?
no.
No. Right?
Yeah. All these guys love that Führerprinzip thing. That's
So one of the sort of fundamental contemporary post-liberal inheritances of these historical examples is the sort of returning to the Führerprinzip, right?
yeah.
This is especially Vermeule's emphasis. We always like makes fun of people that note Carl Schmitt's, crown jurist of the Third Reich status, right? And he's like, these are for people that are easily scared, or what does he call them, like Anglo tyrannophobes or something like that.
Yeah.
Low
Low
caste.
Anglo tyrannophobes. Yeah.
Yeah. But the reason why I fall into that category of tyrannophobes is because where you see the adoption of Führerprinzip, or in this case in the Slovakian it's of the vodka, is that this is what you have to affirm by 1942, that the will of the vodka is an order and the vodka is always right. The vodka is always right. Um, so I have a quotation from Schmitt here, right, which explains this. The strength of the National Socialist state lies in the fact that it is ruled from the top to bottom, and every atom of its existence ruled and permeated within the concept of leadership or Führertum. This principle of leadership, which made the movement strong, must be carried through systematically, both in the administration of the state and in the various spheres of self-government, naturally taking into account the ideological modifications required by the particular area in question, but it would not be permissible for any important area of public life to operate independently from the Führer.
Mm.
Right. And that's what Tiso embraced in 1942. Right.
Yeah.
And when he embraced it, it was after he had adopted Judenrein. All right. And so
Mhm.
this concept of Führerprinzip cannot be extricated this way, right? It cannot be somehow separated from its past, especially because there's no way under this idea of Führerprinzip to critique Judenreich,
Yeah.
right? The will of the vodka is right.
Yeah. And there's no way to check it either.
No, in
Yeah.
fact, the only way to do it is sort of informally and from the shadows. So Tuca and Tiso are still fighting it out. This whole time it could have been Tiso, and I'm saying it wrong, and that's fine. I'm sorry, guys. Just like in Croatia, I have no idea how to pronounce these names. They're I'm an Americanist. I don't know Slovakian, but Tiso and Tuca are still like at each other's throats. Eventually, because of all of these concessions that Tiso makes, Tuca essentially can't really get any leg up by being more Nazi than Tiso because now they're basically the same.
Yeah.
And so finally, Tiso has secured his position as the Führerprinzip or the vodka of Slovakia.
And he
He,
becomes both the president and the prime minister, right?
yes.
Yeah.
And then what happens? The Eastern Front collapses.
Uh, doesn't sound
Right?
like God and his providence was really on his side after
I
all, I guess.
yeah, yeah. God's providence, unfortunately, was not in his favor, nor in for the favor of the people that had supported him. As Czechoslovakia becomes a communist occupied country for decades afterwards. But the Polish revolt begins with the Warsaw Uprising, but it starts without the Soviet assistance. And Tiso watches this happen and is sort of relieved when the Nazis crush it. Um, Romania defects in August of 1944, and these are all neighbors, like sort of in the area. I mean, Romania is obviously quite south, but these are nations that are in the same sphere of influence. And with all of these things happening, two Slovakians, Jan Agolian and Rudolf Wiest, want to organize a Slovakian army that would force the Germans out, and they would do this by colluding with the Soviets. And Tiso is confronted with this choice, right? Like the Nazis are losing. They're rapidly losing. The Soviets are winning. And if you look to the Western Front, it's worse, right? Like uh, France has been totally liberated,
Yeah.
right? So it looks like there's no win here. And the thing is, Tiso can't. He just can't do it. He's been um, uh, he won't work with them. And Tiso ultimately sides with the Nazis by the end of the August because there's really like no guarantee that he'll get any kind of leniency if the Soviets intervene. So he has to go with he goes with the girl that brung him, and he brings in the Nazis, reports Golian and Wiest, and they're killed or they're captured and imprisoned where they die. And after that, the Soviets arrive in Slovakia, liberate it the way that Soviets liberated nations, occupied it. And Tiso stood trial from 1946 to 47, was found guilty of all kinds of charges and hanged in Bratislava on April 18th, 1947, and died.
Wow. Couldn't have happened to a
More
worse guy.
deserving individual.
Yeah.
um,
Holy cow. Yeah. So what was he like celebrating mass this whole time? Was he still believing? I mean, what was he?
this is another one of these cases where there's not a lot that
Yeah.
I could find and fit and had time to consult because we have so many cases. Uh,
Yeah.
this is probably the thinnest sourced section. I just have the one book, and so I feel like I'm just summarizing this one book, and so I'm kind of
Yeah, but
frustrated.
it's still valuable though for the reader
And
to
it's a great press, and the guy's a serious scholar.
yeah.
We're not running here like anything except for very good academically vetted work. I think it suffers from the same problem as Croatia, where you have to know a pretty niche language
Yeah.
in order to get the full story. I have looked, and I would be very grateful to anyone who, before we get this thing sent out, you know, to press, which will probably be in a couple months, for any additional high quality academic research on this. because it's gross. This is the grossest because like Croatia is primarily fascist collaboration, but this is mostly Nazi collaboration,
Yeah.
which is why like I'm not making any excuses for Ante Pavlich. But he wanted to kill Serbs.
Yeah.
That's what he wanted to do. And so he's like, give all the Jews and Roma to Germany if they want it. I don't care. It was not. They did it. They made their best attempts to make it work, but their chief target were Serbs, and it seems like the chief target of the Slovaks were Jews,
Yeah.
right? And in a way that was deeply in accord, a kind of like Catholic reinterpretation of Nazism and the biological sort of like conception of um, of anti-Semitism. So I don't know if he was saying mass. I didn't see anything about him being excommunicated. I
Yeah,
read the
which is
whole book,
wild. Yeah.
and
Which is wild.
just wild.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like Pius the 11th didn't do anything else. They're going to make him no longer a Monsignor. It's like, dude, he's doing Nuremberg. All
Yeah.
right, like excommunicate him now. At least laicize him. Do something.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I wonder that was all about. Maybe they thought they would lose any control over him if they
I don't know, man.
severed the cord.
I think that might
Uh,
be it. I mean, the Vatican was sending people to Slovakia. The Vatican doesn't have a lot of leverage outside of its spiritual authority, which I guess they would lose if they were to excommunicate him, right? Like he would say, well, I guess that's it then.
yeah.
But the
Well,
thing
integrate.
is
See,
that
that's
it's not just about Tiso. It's about the other Catholics who are watching Tiso wear clericals and do this.
yeah. Gosh. Yeah. So I'm curious. Like, gosh. Yeah. Yeah. That's
But it does raise more questions than I'm able to answer, and I'm kind of frustrated by that. But you
yeah.
know, this is also the section I wrote while I was moving. So as I was reading this, if I like was reading and had to correct while I was reading, it's because like there's a lot of typos in this section
Yeah.
and missing
Well,
words. If you guys have
yeah.
ever had to deal with my drafting, I often think faster than I type, and so I just skip words.
Yeah.
We have copy editors, guys. Don't worry. Although I'm
I
sure
mean,
Sora will find something.
listening in there though, like, I mean, kind of putting yourself in that perspective. Um, the sense I mean, I always get a kick out of it because, the Nazis, they famously had their 1,000-year reign that they was, which lasted 12 years.
Yeah.
Like they were a little bit off in their prediction of their success.
Right.
But this Tiso here apparently also thinks like, oh, clearly this is the direction of Providence, and people will thank us later because of this, whatever. There's a real sense in which a triumphalist sense that they get despite having very short-lived power. It's kind of similar to the post-liberals today. I mean, they talk about the new post-liberal order that we've already abandoned. We're already in this new post-liberal order, which they connect with the foreign policy of very niche foreign policy of Viktor Orban, who believes in the sort of this what did he say? Multipolarity, geopolitical multipolarity, where you don't have the United States as this dominant power, but you allow spheres of influence between Russia and China and in the United States, and they start talking that way as if that's going to be the breakdown of the like sort of the liberal order of the post-war liberal order. And I don't know. I feel like I think they're celebrating a little bit too early. I think
Yeah. A
that we're
couple of years ago, I wrote an article for National Review called "No to Neo-Integralism," that in which I talk about how, um, my mentor in graduate school was a man named James W. Caesar.
yeah.
And he wrote a book called Nature and History in American Political Development. But the first part of that book, of that book, it's actually kind of interesting book because it's set up as like a seminar in which people respond to it. But in the early part, it's not really about American political development. It's just about political foundations. What is
Yeah.
the idea in which we ultimately ground our understanding of politics? And you can't, beyond which there is nothing else, right? So for a long time, it was nature.
Yeah.
right? So men possess a fixed nature from which we can gain a certain kind of understanding of politics. And so, even though conditions and cultures might be different, there are certain fixed elements that require us to accommodate in our institutions. And those natures have ends that we can hope the government can fulfill, or at least create space for others to fulfill.
Hmm.
So that's Aristotle, that's Aquinas, and then we have the emergence of historical foundations, capital H history, like Geschichte, right? And this is like Hegel, where we see the development in history, things that change over time. And so we're always arriving at this moment where the evolution of these different institutions and moments lead to this ultimate kind of paradise, this kind of and famously Marx adopts this as a materialist approach rather than it being like the result of these ideas working out with Hegel. It's about material conditions.
Yeah.
And this historical foundation is the same in post liberals, right? It's just that
Yeah.
the narrative they tell isn't the left wing narrative. The left
Yeah.
wing narrative is one of liberation ultimately from arbitrary control.
Yeah.
The post liberal one is um, the defeat in the past that we avenge and establish an even better regime in the future.
Yeah.
And that's Meist, right? If you the person who really developed this narrative of history that becomes the narrative adopted by all others is Meist and Considerations on France.
Hmm.
And if you go to post liberal order and read Vermeule talk about the poverty of conservative imagination, you see it in its most distilled, where he says that the people will welcome a king, and it will only take 4 or 5 people to bring him back to Paris.
Hmm.
And it is at that point where you will have a king in France who won't suffer from all the problems that led to the revolution because they will have been destroyed. And so he also likes to refer to liberalism as a felix culpa, right, or the happy fall, which is usually used in reference to the Bible, right? Like the way that human beings ultimately are able to achieve salvation and go to heaven is because of the fall, which
Yeah.
necessitates the suffering, death, and resurrection of our blessed Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And he sees this politically, which is it's great that liberalism came into existence because now it means that we'll have an even better post-liberal order than what we had pre-liberal. And so that is a
Yeah.
historical narrative that grounds their ideas. And so you're exactly right that there is the similarity. Uh, um, it's just that it's liberation on the left and it's vindication on the right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think and then you see also Denin obviously says that um liberalism relies on conditions it can't supply, so it's ultimately going to collapse under its through its own success, and then something better will emerge out of it. So he's using that same historical sort of narrative that you're saying
Yeah,
with Vermeule.
yeah, and
Um,
the disagreement seems to be like over material versus ideal conditions, but they don't really seem to get that far. They're like all of the above, right? They're not as worried about methodology as like the left Hegelians and later communists are.
yeah, but
Um,
what I see is these same people, the fascists and the all the various forms of fascism, clerical fascism, Mussolini's fascism, Hitler's, Nazi fascism. They all sort of had that sort of historical view too. Like they thought that they were on the right side of history and that this was like what the future was. This is the 1,000-year reign. This is the um but they were wrong. So I mean, it seems to me like they're claiming victory a little bit too soon and they're believing a little bit too much of their own, what do they say? They're 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 getting high on their own supply a little bit, probably.
yeah, it also points to the fact that political foundations in history are bad.
Yeah.
There's not been a good one. Political foundations in human nature, right? If you're counting on human nature remaining the same, you're going to have a stable regime because,
Yeah,
as it
yeah.
turns out, human beings and their nature is pretty stable.
Yeah.
If you're counting on human beings to change,
Yeah.
you're going to run into problems when they don't.
Yeah.
And the solution to the problem is, well, why isn't the regime working? And it's like, well, Jews, or
Yeah.
if you're on the right or on the left, it could be also Jews, but it could be like, what were the peasants in the Soviet, the rich peasants called in the Soviet
Oh,
Union?
um
Kulaks.
kulaks. Yeah, the
Yeah, the
kulaks.
kulaks.
Yeah.
Right. And so you just scapegoat until everyone is so tired or afraid of being killed by the state
Yeah.
that they just stop. And nobody asks why the state isn't working anymore, but the state still isn't working.
Yeah.
There's this in the long telegram. There's this description of how the entire Soviet leadership. This is. Could you look up while I'm talking about this? Could you look up who it was? I don't know what's wrong with me today. I
Yeah.
guess I'm like this every podcast, so I don't know what's wrong with me generally. Um, but in the long telegram, he talks about like the generation of leaders
Where,
after. What's that?
where was this telegram?
It's called a long telegram or sources
Oh.
of Soviet conduct, and I've just
Oh.
completely blanked on the guy's name. And he's like a wasp. He's like classic Ivy style, like northeastern guy. Um,
Oh, yeah, George Kennan.
George Kennan, thank you. George Kennan describes how like the Soviet leadership. He's writing this in 1946. Um, is now like a generation turnover, and nobody is like an Orthodox Leninist anymore. And it's because nobody believes that this really works. But there's this need to perpetuate the idea that this will work because it's what justifies the position of people in the state, especially when it comes to the internal rivalries within the Communist Party. Um, and that is where you end up. And we've gone way long, but since we've gone way long, I just want to point out that this is every single one of these cases has just illustrated how right Kevin Valier is. Right? Kevin Valier asserts that you will run into one of three problems. He argues and just assert you'll run into an argument of problems of transition, you'll run into problems of justice, and you'll run into the third one. Help me.
Stability.
Stability. And
Yeah.
how about all three? Right? And every case, like you run into
Yeah.
them. And the reason is because these are regimes that are designed against nature.
Yeah.
And whenever you say this, to especially to a person who's more on the Catholic side of Catholic integralism, they'll say, "Well, grace perfects nature, and these are regimes of grace." And it's like, yeah, but grace isn't magic.
Yeah, and Grace hasn't perfected this nature every time they've tried this. So I mean, obviously there's something going wrong at the level of nature that's defective there.
That's right. It
Yeah.
turns out that grace perfects nature, but not in this life, but next, in terms
Yeah.
of living politically.
Yeah.
And so, in the event that grace does not perfect nature because the person is unwilling to live a life in the state of grace, then you start living a very unhappy life when those people are in charge.
Yeah.
And even then, even if you have people who believe themselves very sincerely to be religious Catholics, you still end up with anti-Pavlich, who's going to mass. You have a literal priest in Slovakia, right? And so this argument of grace perfects nature is an argument for magic,
Yeah.
that grace will somehow provide for all of the faults and imprudence, creating terrible institutions and the use of violence.
I
Um,
mean, yeah, I mean the people that yes. I mean these people starting paramilitaries or whatever they're doing, trying to whatever, it's that phrase you say, the common good is what we do to you.
yeah,
These
that's
people are
Kevin Gallagher.
I mean, these are not
He's got
people.
so many of those. They're so good.
All of these things involve choices that sort of reject grace, that sort of reject charity, and are really there's a lot of mortal sinning going on here. Just so expect to do a bunch of mortal sins and then have it be cleaned up by grace is just not even a Catholic perspective at all.
Machiavellian means to Aristotelian
Yeah.
ends.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. Well, it failed. It's failing. It will continue to fail if our standard is Catholic, involving faith, hope, and charity, and all the other required virtues, then it is a big failure.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the bell icon, follow us on Twitter at ypostlibfail. Literally hundreds of views. That's more than I expected. but we do this for us. Hopefully the people who are watching are getting a lot out of this. We're kind of working things out in the book as we record these, and I was actually here for this. And if you're wondering how I was able to record this without worrying about the baby, the answer is that my wife has taken her to a doctor's appointment, which is why I kept saying I was pressed for time. And if I've been checking my watch while talking, it's because I've been getting updates about where they are. I've got like Life 360, and they're almost here, so I'm gonna have to
Oh, okay.
go.
Well, it was great talking with you, James.
All right, bye everybody.